On the day that Blood Knight released, I mentioned I already had an amazing build for World Farm, but I didn't want to share it yet, and this had nothing to do with me wanting to keep it private. It was more an issue that it didn't apply to all players, and I wanted to share something that was more broad in that regard. At this point, I'm comfortable sharing the build, so let's go ahead and take a look at the skills. We're going to use Swarm of Bats, Whirling Strike, Spear Flurry, Skewer, and Shadow's Edge. Now this build has a lot more mobility than the previous build for Bloody Grace that I showed. It is capable of being altered for players of all resonance. However, the manner in which it performs and your ability to clear individually is going to change a little bit. But that's okay, because if you're farming in a group, you can kind of run together, tag the mobs, and this build allows you to keep up with them, where some of the other Blood Knight builds don't allow you to even keep pace with them. So let's take a look at the essences and how we're going to transform the majority of these skills. Whirling Strike is going to be untransformed, but we are using essences, and this is going to add an additional charge as well as a burn component to the Whirling Strike. And keep in mind here that the Awakening, not just for these items, but every single piece in this build is just going to add damage. So we're getting 20% additional damage on Whirling Strike here. For Chiropteran, Trade, and Bats and Men both, we're going to get again additional 20% damage from the Awakening, as well as an additional 10% damage from the chest. And we're going to get a transformation here for Swarm of Bats. What this is now going to do is cause a conal effect, and we can run by the mobs, run up to them, whatever it may be, and cast this and let these bats kind of finish off the enemies as we keep going. Also adds an additional charge. Very important for this build. The pants are made to wander. This is going to transform Spear Flurry to cause us to dash forward, damaging enemies in the path, and more importantly, this can be reactivated. This is going to be our primary form of movement boost or even mobility, and we're going to use this sometimes to go through packs, other times to get to a pack, and we have enough charges of all the abilities to kind of rotate these without ever running out of everything at once, and we can kind of stagger things and keep this momentum of this build going. For the offhand, first slot we're going to run Hanging Chalice. This just causes Shadow's Edge to split after it hits an enemy, kind of goes out diagonally. It just gives you a little bit of an opportunity to deal some AoE damage if all the mobs aren't finished off. And on top of that, we're going to get 10% additional damage to Shadow's Edge. I prefer Shadow's Edge in this build since Whirling Strike and Swarm of Bats are both going to kind of do AoE damage of sorts. Sometimes the mobs aren't next to us, and this allows us to kind of continue moving. And if we have to kind of turn around and throw a spear or a lance at them, we can do so without having to kind of run back like we would with Ravage. For Skewer, we're going to transform this into Leaping Smash from the Basalver, and this is going to cause us to kind of leap up into the air and then slam down in the target. This ability does tons of damage, much more than the tooltip on the skill indicator tells you. So make sure that you check this ability out regardless of your resonance. It is very similar to the Wizard Storm armor, in which the tooltip does not do justice to how much damage it actually does. So if you glanced at that and said, this isn't enough damage for me to use, well, you might want to give it another thought. Sprig of Hawthorn, and this is going to increase our skewer damage by 10% for 4 seconds. So if we land down and everything doesn't die, well, we're going to have a damage boost here. And on top of that, we get another 10% damage just from that skewer ability. And as you can see from the gameplay here, I can just continually move from pack to pack, and the speed is pretty good. What I'm running for Paragon Tree is Weaver. Now, what I like about Weaver here is that we're using a combination of both auto attacks or primary attacks as well as skills, so we're keeping the stacks up for this. Makes it a really nice complement. Now, how are we keeping our movement speed up when we're not using these dashes and so forth? Well, we're running the 4-piece Issatar set, and what we're using Issatar for here is getting this movement speed when we defeat an enemy. Okay, this is very important about Issatar, because if you're running this at lower resonance or you farm in a group, you might not be getting all of the kills, and if you don't get the killing blow for Issatar, you're not going to get this buff. And we'll talk about that in just a second. The 4-piece here is going to give us additional damage for any increased movement speed we have. And at this point, given everything and the fact that we're at 30% all the time, we're going to have a large boost here, right? So we're using this in combination with Weaver to keep our movement speed up. We're using those dash charges, and we're using Weaver to give us bonus damage. And the idea around this build is basically to have enough raw damage yourself to kill everything very efficiently. Now, if you're lower resonance, this build still works. But the important thing to notice in the gameplay as I'm showing you this is that I'm making use of these Spear Flurry charges to be efficient with where I position. Okay, a lot of times I'm saving them to the last second to kind of propel me to the next group and keep things going, extend the kill streak, and so forth. You don't have to use that ability to dash through an enemy, okay? If you can, that's even better. but in general, I just want to make sure that I'm getting from pack to pack as fast as possible. So let's go back to what I mentioned about Issatar here. If you aren't killing enemies, so say you're a lower resonance player or you're farming in a group, you're not getting as many of these kills, you have to be able to keep your movement speed up. In that situation, what I would do is actually run the Massacre Paragon tree, and this is going to give you a massive boost to your movement speed. Let me pull that up for you as well, and you'll see that we can get this boundless strides as well as the combat trance, and we'll get these bonuses and have a really high uptime, especially if we're farming in a group, right? We should essentially have 100% uptime unless we outpace the circle or the loop, and this is going to be absolutely massive for allowing us to keep up to the group. We would then want to change Issatar, and you have a variety of options here. You could run something like 2-piece Grace and 2-piece Banquet. Instead of running 4-piece Issatar, you could run 2-piece Shalbast because you do use primary attacks. Okay, you can kind of add some flexibility. 2-piece Gloom would work here, and I recommend probably running tri-sets here, okay? I think that's going to be the best option. Something like 2-piece Gloom, 2-piece Banquet, 2-piece Grace are all going to be a great choice here, or even mix in 2-piece Shalbast if you don't have one of those and you're just buffing your damage in any way possible. I don't think if you run something like 4-piece Grace, you're going to get in 5 hits if you're farming with a group. Now, if you're using this build solo and choose to run Massacre instead of Weaver, that is an option as well. You could swap off the 4-piece Issatar in that case, and you could run a 4-piece. You might get benefit from 4-piece Grace in that regard. So, like I said, this build's super efficient, probably, in my opinion, the fastest Blood Knight farm build out there, but it has a little bit of a requirement in terms of resonance. You can add some of these alterations, as I mentioned, just to make the build work for players of all resonance, but it's not going to have the exact speed that you see from a high resonance player. All right, why did I come back to the Essence Transfer? Well, I want to talk about Transmog for a minute here. I don't think this is worth its own video, so I just want to add it into the end of this build guide. It's right here at the Essence Transfer. You go in. It's just a new option, okay? So simply select that. And the first letdown for many people, myself included, is there's only 3 options per slot. Kind of go through and glance at them. Now, I'm going to choose a helm option just because this has a really dramatic change that should be very noticeable. I'm going to go ahead and choose to equip that. And what you'll notice is the second letdown for a lot of people is that you can't mix and match with the Transmog and the cosmetics. In fact, if I want to show this Transmog, I have to entirely remove the cosmetic. It would have just added so much diversity and just options for players to kind of mess around, create their own looks, potentially even just a mini game of sorts in which people kind of had contests or developed things and posted them and just kind of hyped up the game in general. So just kind of really hoping, fingers crossed here, that this system sees some pretty big updates and just continues to be developed further, allowing more diversity and just general options for players. Another thing in a similar topic here is I think it's about time to have a gender change at the barber. This is something a lot of players have requested for some time now. We've got the ability to change our appearance and so forth, but a simple gender swap for players who are interested would be kind of a nice change as well. As always, thanks for taking the time to watch and have a great day.